Alright guys, we did it. In this series, we went over alternate universe scenarios with Ketchum starting his first journey to become a champ across a few regions. This time we've reached the finale, and may I say that this was an excellent mini-series. It definitely was a fun experience, and I hope you all had fun in this journey too. But you know me, I'm not one to stall, so let's go straight ahead and get straight to the rules. If you already understand the whole shebang, just skip to the timestamp. The first is that this is an alternate canon. This just gives me the excuse to alter anything that happened in the main canon of the anime. The most commonly used example is that I'd give Ash a Pokemon he hasn't even caught. Hence the what if. The second rule is that we're limiting the amount of starters to just one. That way we can make a more unique and spicier team. And then for the last rule is that we'll just ignore any character restrictions, which mainly applies to evolution. Bulbasaur not ready to evolve? Forget it. Pikachu too prideful to take a Thunderstone? Who cares? Don't like Rowlet using the Everstone? Just remove it. You get the gist. Final thing to mention is that if you're new to this or need reminding, this is how it works. I go over 3 topics, with the first being its battle characteristics. Basically, whatever makes a certain Pokemon unique in a battle, or its best trait, or just whatever move it uses. Next is battle strength, which defines who are mostly skilled and, well, who is the opposite. Lastly is personality, which of course is the characteristics that makes one unique, like Toko crying. But I assume you get how this all works now, so without stalling any longer, let's get started.
Pokemon, get to the
Now, the first pick we will be going over with is Floatel. Firstly, let's talk about his personality. In the main canon, it was rather battle crazy as a Weasel, but what made him stand out was that he was initially a non-battle Pokemon when caught. This desire for battle is what eventually placed him under Ash's ownership in the first place. This determination to fight also gave him some pretty neat moves. This will lead on to battle characteristics. For the most part, his main moves were Aqua Jet and Sonic Boom, but was probably his most signaturized is Ice Punch and a variant of Aqua Jet, Ice Aqua Jet. And lastly, let's go over Floatel's skill in battle. And I'm gonna be honest here, Floatel sucks. Like, it was pretty chill from early to mid DP, but afterwards it went downhill. I'm excluding the Mr. Mime battle here as it was valid, but from Byron onwards, it was loss after loss after loss after loss after loss. Man, I don't even want to give credit to the Gastrodon win because for both it and Aggron, Paul verbatim says that those two were willing to carry the role of being defeated. Despite that though, I really want to bring up an interesting twist. That is the ability Swift Swim. Although used rarely, Floatel always gained a noticeable edge being linked with its speed. With that and everything else, I think Floatel suffices as somewhat of the dark horse of the team. But now we're heading to the second pick, and that's gonna go to Raptor. The first thing to talk about is its battle characteristics, and it's honestly the most straightforward. On paper, it's pretty boring because it has quick attack and an aerial ace less cool than Swellow's. The other half of its moves are pretty interesting. The first being Brave Bird, for which in hindsight, they really loved recoil moves in this series. But we'll put this move onto the side for now. The second move to talk about is Close Combat, and that's honestly one of the most unique moves for the birds. Despite a majority of its moves just being ramming into the opponent, its other 2 signature moves are what makes it stand out for being one of the most offensive birds in Ash's roster. The unfortunate part is that we're going to transition into its battle skill, and well, I mean, it's okay. Like, it would rack up some pretty mean wins, but then it'd also follow up with some pretty nasty ones. Really underwhelming looking back on it, and even worse, it's one of the few Ashmons to faint from Team Rocket, and possibly the only one to have done it twice. Then lastly is its character. Initially, it suffered from what was called the Regional Bird Curse, a name renowned for Ash's birds that just done scout missions and was pretty much just boring. Although that term is highly subjective and flimsy in my opinion. For example, this quickly fizzles out as a Staravia. Like with Weasel, it was battle crazy, which especially was highlighted when it wanted to learn new moves, especially Brave Bird. Told you I had it on the side. But honestly, learning Brave Bird was probably one of the most memorable move learning moments ever. Although a lot of the spunk does go away as a Staraptor, but again, I don't believe in the Regional Bird Curse. But with all of that, I do think Staraptor is a decent pick at the end of the day. The third and last spot of the first half though will be going to none other than Gliscor. Being real, out of the potential options, Gliscor was one that I couldn't count out. To understand why, let's go over its character. To start off as Gligar, this little guy was probably one of the most compelling Ash had. It was sort of a crybaby, but not in a torquil kind. Its cowardice extended to the point it couldn't even spar with its own teammates. Although in Gligar's defense, this was until after Apollo traumatized it, but in context of that, evolving was actually a cool stance on trying to overcome that trauma. And luckily, Gliscor is one of the lucky ones that doesn't downgrade in personality when evolving. Most of what's said here is pretty much shown in the episode in which Gligar evolves, so check that out for more. To not drag this on more, let's get to its battle skill. And the sad part here is that Gliscor doesn't really do jack. But what truly makes it sad is that practically all but one loss was against its power. Winning was objectively impossible. The bright side, I guess, is that its 2 wins were memorable though. Lastly is its unique battle characteristics. To cut this short, despite having an airborne member already in this team, Gliscor actually uses this approach differently with a vast amount of coverage along with its ace attack, Giga Impact. So yeah, with all of Gliscor's unique charm, I believe he's a great spot for this team. Now, the 4th and first pick of the second half will be going to, surprisingly, Luxray. See, if you've seen both Johto and Hoenn, you'll see that I'll come up with Pokemon that Ash doesn't even own for these teams. Some are obligatory, some are optional, and as you can see, this was a conscious decision. But what sparked this is that I believe that Ash having electric type is kinda mandatory. Without stalling though, let's get to its character. The personality I wanted to give was a vigilant type. Of course, ever so loyal like any other Ashmon would have, but this little guy would be a little bit more serious and dedicated to its craft. As to its battle characteristics, if you paid attention to the clips, you should know that I'm just gonna rip off from that Luxray episode in DP. It's basically similar to Pikachu. And lastly, for its battle skill, and because there's no record to go off of, let's just say he's average or above average, I don't know. Overall, I think Luxray would probably make a pretty interesting spot. But now, we're at the last 2, and who boy, this is gonna be fun. The second to last pick will be going to none other than Lucario. To get straight to the point, let's talk about its battle characteristics. The moves were its iconic Aura Spear, its hand-to-hand approach Bullet Punch, its status move Double Team, and the last resort Reversal. Now, this moveset is absolutely wonderful, especially moves like Double Team and Bullet Punch, which I feel like were cool similarities to other aces, while also keeping Lucario's identity. Last thing about the moves is that despite Greninja not existing in this alternate canon, Lucario would still learn Aura Amplification. Next up is its power though, and ignoring the L's as Riolu, Lucario was actually a beast, primarily always being the one to count on besides Pikachu. Despite that being the bare minimum of an ace, I feel like the feats backed it up tremendously. If we looked at that alone, it's no surprise that this dog is the strongest Pokemon Ash ever owned, excluding Pikachu of course. Lastly is its character, and I feel many misunderstand it, like calling it inconsistent for example. But I say otherwise. A quick TLDR, it's a child. Unlike majority of Ash's Pokemon, Lucario came from an egg during its debut, making it one of the youngest Pokemon in his possession. It always looked for inspirations to become greater than it was as Riolu. It usually always sought to turn stoic and cheery, but I honestly think that's not bad. I feel like its more stoic behaviors was an act that it puts on, but at the end of the day, Lucario is still a proud little kid on the inside. I don't know. Last thing to mention, but Lucario and Ash's meeting due to fate, alongside the fact that Lucarios as a whole are parallels to their trainers in the anime, it tells me that Lucario is one of, if not one of the perfect members to be on this team. But now you're probably wondering, who could even be the last guy? Well, here's my answer. The last member of this team will be going to none other than Infernape. Initially, this was not the plan because Floatel was going to be the starter. To not drag this, I just saw Turtwig being a much more promising member in Ash's team in the main canon in the beginning. And as you know, I try to make things a little unique in this series. This also initially sparked me into wanting Lucario to being the ace, because I thought Infernape would just complicate the hierarchy. But who said 2 lessons can't coexist? But to get straight to the meat and potatoes, let's discuss its battle skill. Infernape was probably one of the most impressive Pokemon Ash has. If we exclude the Flint battle, Infernape was in fact undefeated. Sure, its feats were a little vague, but from narrative portrayal alone, it should be obvious that Infernape has the capability to compete or even surpass its peers even outside of Sinnoh. So in this alternate canon where Ash only journeys across Sinnoh, I believe Infernape could achieve identical or even higher heights than in the main anime. But next up is battle characteristic, for which Infernape specializes in physical confrontation. But the most interesting thing about him is how the ability Blaze makes all of that look scarier than usual. Lastly is its character, and to be frank, it's amazing. Infernape is no doubt one of the most colorful aces, especially when it shows physical joy. And the final thing about my favorite monkey is that what made them the last member to talk about was that I felt it matched the synergy best from a Sinnoh perspective. To be honest, it really doesn't matter because I view both it and Lucario being dual aces, similar to Alola Ash, but I felt Infernape was the better guy to close off on. And with all of those things, Infernape is an amazing pick for this team. But now we got them all. For the summary, we got the Dark Horse Floatel, the combative bird star Raptor, the emotional Gligar, the vigilant Luxray, the aspiring kid Lucario, and the fiery passionate Infernape. I think this is a solid team here, but unfortunately I had to exclude Gible. The main reason for this is that I found evolving Gible into Garchomp would just downgrade the charm it had. Plus, if I added Gible as just a Gible, it would just ruin the champion aesthetic in my opinion. As usual though, I make these from an anime influence, so don't assume this will be viable on Showdown or something. And lastly, because I'm running out of things to say, as mentioned earlier, this is going to be the stopping point for this series. If you know me enough, you'll know that I don't release these things often, so stay tuned whenever I guess. But that's pretty much all I got for now. Yep.